right, it is Tuesday, October 24th. Welcome to Film School Dropout. I am your host, Ben Friedman. And today for this episode, this is maybe going to be the pause of this series for a while, depending on what is going on with Killers of the Flower Moon. I have not taped this episode. As of October 24th, Tuesday, I have not seen Killers of the Flower Moon yet. I, in theory, do have someone coming on for that episode. Still trying to work on scheduling and all that. With that all said, though, we're going to the last release Scorsese title before Killers of the Flower Moon. We're in the year 2019, The Irishman, starring Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, and Al Pacino. Joining me today is the one and only Keith Phipps. Keith Phipps is one of my favorites, and I'm really glad I have his book right here, Age of Cage, which is a Nicolas Cage book that also explores the history of Hollywood. This is one of my favorite reads. This is an incredibly insightful book. Keith Phipps is a gentleman, a scholar. He is just such a great guy. I've worked with him in the past. He came on my podcast a few years ago, right early when I started out. I think I hadn't even been working as a film journalist or critic for 3 months. I mean, he was so early on my podcast. He was such a joy. We did a Nick Cage bracket where we were trying to figure out what was the best Nick Cage performance. So go give that episode a listen. That's one of my favorites that I've ever recorded. He came back to talk The Irishman, and I'm so grateful for Keith. So do me a favor. One, like this episode, and two, go out. You can buy Age of Cage on Amazon. I've seen it at my local Barnes & Noble. Go out and support Keith's book, and go out and support Keith. He is such a talented writer, and everything he does, it's just an instant listen. So I'm so excited for him to kind of be closing off the series with The Irishman. Also, fun little tidbit, at the end of this, I reveal my top 5 Scorsese. And so for those who have been following along, that's finally happening. So I hope you all enjoy that. So without further ado, thank you, Keith, for joining me for The Irishman. And we'll be right back with The Irishman. Hello and welcome to The Irishman discussion. I've been teasing this one for now 25, 26 episodes, however many I'm at this point. And it's kind of the big one. It's the last one before we get to Killers of the Flower Moon. Like I said, I've been really excited for this one. I booked this episode long in advance. We're finally here. I've been teasing a lot of things, especially my top 5 Scorsese list, which I've been very protective on this show about. I said I was not going to reveal it until we recorded the Irishman episode, and I am sticking with that. I have the list right here, and I am so honored today to be joined by someone that I've had on my show before. He is the author of the book Age of Cage, 4 Decades of Hollywood Through One Singular Career. He writes for a lot of incredible magazines, newspapers, online sites, including The Ringer, Vulture TV Guide, Rolling Stone, and The Reveal. You can find him on social media everywhere. It is film critic Keith Phipps.
Hello.
Keith, I am so excited to have you on. You were on really early on in my career, probably 2+ years ago at this point. We did the best Nicolas Cage performances, which I have a lot of thoughts on in retrospect. It has never sat well with me that we ended up picking Pig as the crowning achievement, although that movie is great. I don't know. It just, every few months I think about it and I'm like, I should have fought harder for Raising Arizona.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's hard. The opposite ends of the career, and who knows? But I'm really comfortable with that one. I think that's a really good one. So I maybe it's a little fresh in the mind at that point. I mean, I am kind of looking. I mean, the reports on this new movie coming out of Toronto are quite strong too. So maybe we'll have to revisit this again.
Yeah, it might be one of those things we look back at every 10 years. But Keith, like I said, I reached out to you a few months ago. There was a list of movies that I had sent to you, but there was always one that I kind of was circling as, I kind of want this to be the quote unquote, like, end of the series. I know, I mean, I'm doing Killers of the Flower Moon as well, but like kind of just the last part before we get into Killers of the Flower Moon. So when I pitched you Irishman, one, I knew that was going to be a commitment, but I'm glad you're joining me for this for a movie that this is the second time I've seen this movie. I saw it obviously when it came out. It's Netflix, 2019. This is the second time I've watched it. I actually spoiled myself during the July sales. I picked up no free plugs, but it's a free plug, The Irishman on Criterion, uh, which I was just very excited to get. And we're doing it today. So I guess Keith, my question for you is how do you feel being here for The Irishman?
Well, I'm happy to be here. I really wanted to revisit this film. I had not seen this since it came out either. So, when with something this long, you kind of almost need an excuse to rewatch it, just like a professional reason in my case, to carve out that amount of time for it. So I was eager to watch it again.
I had the same thing where this movie had been sitting with me one ever since I saw it, and then specifically post COVID, like living in a COVID world for as many years as we did, specifically, and I mean during the lockdowns, like the height of the lockdowns, this movie took on a weird resonance with me, and I could
Mm.
not get scenes of this movie out of my head. And I never rewatched it, especially during COVID, because I couldn't handle the emotional distress that I knew this movie would put me through in the mindset that I was already going through with lockdown. But there were elements of it that I just kept thinking about, kept thinking about. And so I was so fascinated to watch this movie that was one of the last big movies that I remember pre COVID. And then, like, watching it now with the context of everything that happened 2020 and on, it was quite a fascinating experience. At times, it was a little bit, I don't want to say necessarily triggering experience, but there were certainly elements of this movie that I found quite distressful and just really challenging to do. And it's also just the difference of where I am at the age of I saw this movie Irishman. I was graduating college at that point. I was my
Mm.
senior year. I had to do it the thing where it was literally came out the weeks of my finals. Like it was dead week. The week before finals is specifically when it came out. So I had to do that thing where I'm writing all these papers, essays, studying for the test, and I have to just kind of I'm going to see The Irishman, but I can't sit there for 3.5 hours. I have to break it up 30, 45 minutes at a time. So I watched this over kind of 3 or 4 days, if I recall. I remember I was at Chico State. I was watching it for like 30 minutes. And then when I got the opportunity after exam, I watched it for like an hour. And that's how I watched this movie. So I was excited to sit down and watch this. I did it in two chunks. I don't know how many it took you.
It took me a couple just because my schedule was weird and it is a long movie. I was lucky enough to see it projected the first time I saw it in a critic screening here in Chicago, which, I always think, especially with something that's long and demanding, it's better to be locked in with it. It's just, I love, not being able to get up and make myself a snack or whatever. Not that I did that in this time, but I think it's just, I really just a big fan of the theatrical movie going experience. That said, I didn't feel like it was lessened at all watching it at home, or even breaking it up. I remember at the time there was a tweet going around where someone like showed you how to turn it into like a 4 episode TV series, like the different points where it makes sense to break. And it kind of got made fun of a lot, but it kind of made sense to me, honestly. If you, it is if you're going to, with something this big, it's, if it makes sense to break it up like that, maybe you do it if you have no other option.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things that because I remember when I was in college, I was writing actually about Scorsese for my history class. I was writing about the King of Comedy. And so my professor and I were obviously big fans of Scorsese. So we spent a lot of time talking about King of Comedy, but Irishman was just around the corner. And specifically at this time, obviously, Joker was also coming out in October, which the King of Comedy ties and Taxi Driver debates kind of got brought back into the cultural zeitgeist, at least in online writing for sure, and especially film Twitter at times. And so, he and I were talking about, my professor and I were talking about it and just the situation of which we both watched it. Cause obviously I'm on finals week. He's telling me like, he's like, yeah, my wife and I watched it, but we did it kind of in like 45-minute uh sections, kind of like how you'd watch a Netflix show. Like instead of watching an episode of Breaking Bad that night, we're gonna watch 45 minutes of The Irishman. And I think that's probably how a lot of people watch it. It's hard to commit 3.5 hours to
Hmm.
a movie, and especially a movie like this that can be extremely challenging at times, not necessarily ever narratively, but it does require a lot of focus, especially in this first hour. This first hour of the movie takes its time.
Yeah, I mean, and that said, if you can watch it uninterrupted, I do recommend it. I watched The Leopard recently, another long film that one I was able to watch in one single viewing, and thematically, there's a lot of ties there. I mean, just the sort of um, and we're going to get into it, I'm sure, but just sort of the emphasis on mortality and the sort of the devastating finality of the end of this movie is very much, I think, inspired by The Leopard, which is one of Scorsese's favorite films, or maybe I'm just seeing connections because I watched them in close proximity, but they were good companions that way.
Yeah, no, this movie comes out 2019. I specifically remember, you're gonna hate this one. I had the chance to see this projected
Hmm.
my Thanksgiving break. Uh I had the choice between two movies. It was The Irishman and Frozen 2. And I said Frozen 2. Now I have, I think, legitimate reason for doing that. One, I actually don't think Frozen 2 is that bad of a movie, but
No,
two,
it's fine.
I had done it because my family and I were traveling to Disneyland the next day. And I also remember being like, I can take my mom to Frozen 2. I don't think she'd be able to sit through 3.5 hours plus the credits and trailers of The Irishman, which is now you're kind of committing 4 hours to a movie theater sitting. So I'm like, I'm going to do this. I've regretted it since that day. I'm like, gosh, I wish I saw that movie on the big screen. But yeah, this is the
Well,
reality. This is one of these movies that I just never got to see on the big screen.
let me let you off the hook a little bit there, because
Mm.
part of the problem, I think, was it was not in theaters for very long. I mean,
It was a
Netflix.
week, I think.
Yeah, and Netflix was and remains in the habit of giving, sort of a token theatrical release to many of its films. So I was lucky to see this. I was lucky to see Roma. I was lucky to see Glass Onion on the big screen. But I think for most people, it was easiest to watch this on Netflix. But also, like, the window in which you could watch it anywhere else was pretty slim.
Yeah, no, it's Netflix is. I'm actually glad you brought it up because it made me think about the two times Netflix has ever reached out to me and been like, "Hey, you want to go see one of our movies on the big screen for press?" I'm like, "Sure." It was Glass Onion, and the other one was The Gray Man, which
Hmm.
was a fun experience of just being there and like realizing pretty early on they had invited me for a reason, and that crowd was not particularly hyped for that movie, and I'm just sitting there and like, "Oh, okay, this is going badly," but yeah, I don't want to bash Netflix. They don't send me any screeners though, so calling them out for that. But so I guess before we actually jump into The Irishman, Keith, I wanted to talk with you not necessarily about this film in particular, but what's your relationship with the guy that this is all centered around, Marty Scorsese? Do you remember the first time you saw one of his films?
Yeah, I do actually. In retrospect, the first Scorsese footage I ever saw was the opening credits of Alice, the sitcom, which I watched fairly regularly as a kid because I'm older than you. So that was on the air when I was growing up. But I remember, this will also date me. I watched Siskel and Ebert pretty regularly from a young
Mm,
age, and I'd see all these movies I would never have a chance of seeing or wouldn't see till years later because I'm a kid, right? But I did remember seeing an episode of the Future the King of Comedy. So that was kind of on my radar when it hit cable, probably about a year later. So I'm about 10 years old. So
mm,
middle of the afternoon, I watch the King of Comedy, and it's so much of it goes over my head, but I'm
yeah,
I'm
of
really
course.
struck by it nonetheless. I mean, it's a very striking movie. Sandra Bernhard's performance really stood out, especially. I mean, I knew who Jerry Lewis was. I knew what he was kind of playing, who he was kind of playing, but I'm 10, whatever. I'm not going to get
Yeah,
this
of
movie.
course.
But when I revisited it as a grown up, I was surprised by how much I remember it from that first viewing. I mean, it just kind of a lot of it just kind of burned itself into my memory. And like after that, I don't know what order I saw things. Color of Money, I know I watched on VHS, After Hours, like a lot of the 80s stuff as it came out on video. The first one I saw in theaters was New York Stories. Um,
Really?
yeah, yeah, and I do really like his segment of that, but I think it was the kind of thing where people I took with me were mad because they were not into it at all.
Sure.
And like, here's my Irishman shame story. I did not see Goodfellas in theaters for whatever reason. I didn't catch it till years later, but then after that, I did see Cape Fear in 91 a year later. So I think between 90 and 91 is when really I kind of got locked into like, okay, I gotta let's do this. Let's be serious about this. I need to see these movies as they come out. And I don't think I missed one in the theater since then, except Age of Innocence, because I was out of the country at the time studying abroad and didn't get a chance to watch it then. So yeah, I've been on board. I've been on board with him ever since. But I mean, to long, which was another way of saying like he's one of my guys. I mean, it is in some ways Scorsese is. And loving Chris Scorsese is not controversial. I guess it's kind of gotten controversial post that all that Marvel nonsense.
Yeah.
What was frustrating to me about that is like Scorsese is like the easiest to get on, easiest auteur to kind of lock into, even for people who don't normally aren't that intensely don't necessarily have intense relationships with directors, and for him to become this sort of this gatekeeping snob in the popular imagination is so strange to me because he makes, even at his most austere, even with something like Silence, these are movies that are made for audiences. So these are definitely, this is a popular entertainment is a weird thing to apply to Silence, but it's definitely a film that was meant to be seen by audiences, by in general at least.
There was something so weird about this whole controversy to me as well, was just like the fact that like what he said wasn't even necessarily degrading of the movies.
Hmm.
Like there was this whole attribute that it was such a negative thing he said. And he was just like, no, these movies serve a different purpose than me making The Irishman does. And he
Yep.
didn't necessarily criticize that anyway. It was a bizarre controversy that has still lasted. I mean, I still see that debate uh somehow get rehashed every few months, which is it's actually kind of like infuriating at times where I see it, and I'm just like, well, whatever. But anyway, in that conversation, like I think you hit on this element that makes Scorsese so interesting is this the iconography that he brings, and also kind of the fame that he brings to filmmaking and as a representation of Hollywood, of directors. Because and I'll give this personal anecdote real quick. So we're recording this September 11th. Yesterday was September 10th. My girlfriend and I was just kind of doing some catch up on movies that I'll either be talking about soon or just wanted to revisit. And so I was watching Hugo, and so I had convinced her to watch it with me. And it was just like one of these weird things where it's like, she's like a casual film fan. She likes a lot of movies. I wouldn't say like Scorsese by any means is a director that is a go-to for her, to the point that I'm not even positive she's seen a Scorsese movie outside of what we watched of Hugo yesterday. She knew who Martin Scorsese was. Like she understood the importance and legacy that he had brought, even again, though she doesn't necessarily know his work. She knows the fame of Martin Scorsese. I'm sure she knows Goodfellas, all that. Like that's a really powerful thing to have on movie going audiences, to be that level of an auteur and also a popular auteur, which is essentially what Scorsese is. He's our most populist, as you said, a populist like auteur director to some degree.
Sure.
It's
Yeah,
a
I'm
it's a
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, it's a really fun thing to, and it's been a fun thing to get into this Irishman, or I should say, the Irishman, but also specifically Martin Scorsese's filmography as whole. And that's, I think it's like the fun thing about the Irishman for me was seeing this movie post seeing everything else, because in 2019 I'd seen my fair share of Scorsese. I'd seen most of the big titles. It it's the little things in the series for me, like having never seen The Last Temptation of Christ before seeing
Hmm.
The Irishman, never even knowing what After Hours or Kundun was. Like watching these movies that kind of fill out the directors, uh, his relationship to film, that's where it became really fun for me. And then coming back to not necessarily the culmination of everything that we've been talking about in Scorsese, but certainly an element that does feel like him closing the door in The Irishman.
For sure. I wish I could remember who said this. I definitely would want to give them credit, but someone has described Irishman is it's Scorsese's final film. It just doesn't happen to be his last film. It does have like sort of a summing up final statement kind of quality to it as well. And certainly I hope there are many more to come, but it definitely is an autumnal work.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of where we can start with this conversation with The Irishman. So I guess kind of just like, what were you? Because I'll share this before I really ask you the question. Like, going into The Irishman, I was just kind of curious about certain elements of this movie. 2019, it comes out. Parasite very much overshadows it at this year's awards ceremony.
Mhm.
Uh, Netflix has had a weird lasting quality with movies in the sense that like it does kind of feel like the conversation on these movies falls out pretty quickly, where some other studios, specifically streaming studios, it kind of feels like their movie is still in conversation after a few years. And so Netflix will admit, well, I wouldn't say The Irishman ever fell out of conversation because it is Martin Scorsese. There was this element going into this movie that I was just like, I remember there being very specific elements of this movie that I just didn't vibe with. And there is this way that Netflix films look like. There's this kind of like gloss shine over them. And I've never been able to fully describe if it's just the lighting, if it's whatever it is, but there is just something always like slightly off about Netflix movies, the way they look like. It's All Quiet on the Western Front is another of these examples where I think that film is technically brilliant, and yet there's just something a little off about it. Maybe it's the transfer from shooting on actual camera to pressing it down to Netflix. Regardless of whatever it is, there were elements of it where I was just like, how is this de-aging technology going to look? And that was what I
Mhm.
was going into this movie with. Like there were the certain like reservations that I had on the movie the first time. Like, is age going to hurt this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't think I know what you're describing with Netflix movies. I never really saw that with this one. I think it's a really good looking movie. Um, but I do the quality you're speaking of is certainly I've seen that in other films for sure. In terms of the aging thing, I mean, honestly, my first take on it was it's kind of a C minus element to an A plus movie.
Mm,
But I've kind of come to appreciate it. I mean, it is almost feels like in some ways. So our hero, quote unquote, Frank Sheeran, is not necessarily a reliable narrator, or even if we want to see him as an unreliable narrator, he's someone who's reflecting on his life from the end of it. So I think in some ways you can kind of see like this incomplete aging technology as his inability to fully see the past in terms of in terms of not able to fully see the past, but also kind of looking at it through a filter of his own age. In some ways, I may just be making an excuse
mm.
for effects that weren't quite all the way there because there are elements to it that are quite janky, but at the same time, if you look at it that way, it kind of makes it go down a little easier.
No, I had the same approach while watching this movie this time, where I was just like, this kind of aspect that you can't tell, is he trying to be 20 in this movie? Is he supposed to be 40 in this scene, 60? Like, it does all blur together in this way where it's just like, it does feel like someone recounting their life. And to them, to a degree, even the timeline's getting a little blurred in
Hmm.
their own head, where it's just like, I have memories of me being a kid talking to like a teacher and thinking at the age of third grade, like I sound like how sound talking to you. Like, so it is that like weird thing where I'm just like, I don't remember my voice ever not sounding the way it
Hmm.
does. And I think that's what this movie actually achieves in its special effects, is just this element where it does almost feel like the characters themselves are just kind of lost in the past, and yet it's so much of a blend of where they are now slash where they were. And it's this kind of a nostalgic element to it. So it does work for me. I think the other thing that helped with this movie while watching it again the second time is I didn't watch it on Netflix. I do have the Blu-ray edition,
Hmm.
and I will say I thought this movie looked great on Criterion. I thought this was a really great transfer of the movie. I think it really does. And I should just say this. Here's my other strike. I watched The Irishman the first time on my phone. Like I
Oh
did.
no.
I did. No,
Oh
I was in
no.
college. Like I just like, it was post test and I was just like hanging out in like the lunchroom,
uh,
just like having my lunch and I'd have it propped up on like my napkins and soda. And
well,
that's all.
I guess the way I'll defend you and say you were there very eager to watch The Irishman, so
No,
had
it
to
was
watch it
one
like
of these movies. Like I had to watch it in any form that I could.
sure.
And I like didn't have a TV in college. Like I had an iPad and I had a phone. So I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll just watch it. And I think I probably did it both. I think there were probably some days where I did have my iPad on me and I would watch it on my iPad for like 45 minutes. And
Hmm.
then other times where it was just like, okay, I'll just watch it on my phone for half an hour. Because I remember specifically, there's the scene in the movie where JFK is, we find out about the assassination of JFK in this movie. I was on the bus going to Chico State, watching it on my phone. I had my AirPods in. I remember having it propped up. I was going to an exam, and that scene happened in the movie. And then I had to turn it off because I had to get to my exam.
Hmm.
But, like I remember going down, I think it was West Second, to get there. And like that was the fun memory of this, which was also going to revisit it. It's also probably an unfair criticism for me then to be like it has the Netflix shine to it when I
Yeah.
am watching it on my phone. So
Perhaps so.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I didn't know you were referring to how it looks on Netflix itself versus how it looks as a film. I have not watched it on Netflix, so I couldn't really speak to that. But it does look great on the Blu-ray, which is how I watched it this time.
Yeah, no, I had so with that all, like, I was like really excited for this movie, like almost to like a point that I didn't know how I was going to go into watching this movie. And then I started hearing people talk about it, and they're like, this movie is not Goodfellas. This movie is not The Departed. This isn't even like Wolf of Wall Street, like some of the bombastic nature of Scorsese. It's very toned down. I heard a lot of people actually kind of comparing it to this is more similar in style to what he's doing in Silence than it is
Mm.
Departed, Goodfellas, and all that. So I went into this movie just like not knowing fully what I was going to get. And I remember at the end of watching this movie, this is a movie, and it's again kind of the part one, part two, part three of it. This movie does come at you in acts. And there are certain acts in this movie that I just think are pinnacle Scorsese in just like the Goodfellas element of it. And then there's the third act, which I think is kind of the reason this movie gets the perfect, revealing it right now, it gets the perfect 5 stars for me. This ending to me is just like the most profound, the most beautiful, the most just heart wrenching element of Scorsese's career. I think this final like hour of the movie is just something that just it left me floored after watching it. I will never
Mhm.
forget the ending of this film the first time watching it. The scene where one of the other discourses that drove me crazy during the time was the Anna Paquin
Oh,
discussion on
sure.
this movie, which I just fully disagree with people on that point here. I know there was a lot of talk about this, and I think Anna Paquin is brilliant in this movie with doing like I think she has exactly one line in this movie. And yet if she's not in this movie doesn't fundamentally work.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, and that's that's an essential character, like you say, and for her to say any more, I mean, it really is about someone who's been silenced and has kind of been a silent witness to horrible things. Like kind of picking off that. Like I was thinking when you were talking about how it's more in the mode of the silence, I think there's something to that in a way. I think with in terms of his relationship with violence, on-screen violence, with Goodfellas and Casino, it's horrifying, but it's also thrilling. I mean, it is played for thrills. Like you're closer to the protagonists in that film than anything else. I think this film puts us in the feet of Anna Paquin's character, who Peggy, even as a young child, when she from that moment when she witnessed her father beating up the shopkeeper. It's it's just the horror on her face and her inability to say anything or prevent it, and just kind of have to like accept this as who her father is and how the world works. It's an uncomfortable, it's a much more uncomfortable place to be, as uncomfortable as the violence can be in those earlier films.
Mhm. Watching the movie that I actually found this to have the most relationship with watching it again was Casino has a very similar ending. Not in the as far as it hits, but Casino does directly take the ideas of what Goodfellas is doing and takes it a step further. And it's like, this is actually the lives these people will live. Like, this
Hmm.
is where their downfall will happen. This is kind of how pathetic this all ends up for all of them. And so, like, you see that element of Casino, and then it's just really explored here in The Irishman. The moment of this movie that I remember the first time watching this, that I just remember my breath being taken away by the script, and it's probably the line that has become the most famous in this movie is in the third act where Frank Sheeran he's talking with I want to say it's FBI or someone's coming to his door asking about questions, uh, basically all about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, and he's like, he tries defending Bill like I wouldn't throw people under the bus, and the guy just tells him he's like, Bill's gone, Bill's dead,
Hmm.
like no one else is alive, like you're not protecting anybody, it's over. Uh, and that moment in this film is this, it's the moment of this film I remember. Like, it is the perfect summation of this movie to me. It's just how empty life becomes when you've only lived this life of toxicity and cruelness and evilness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, another way I think it kind of veers, kind of comments on, but veers away from past approaches is the habit of putting on screen how characters died.
Mm,
And the sort of the inglorious ends these people meet, no matter how how who they are when you see them, but it's not depicted. It's just sort of this pathetic detail. It's just sort of this is where it all goes. There's no nothing to be gained from showing it. We'll just tell you it. Showing it would only glamorize it in some
mm.
ways.
You know, Scorsese in this film is very, he's always been someone who's had a respect, admiration. You know, he's always engaged in film criticism. Obviously, him being a friend of Roger Ebert probably contributes largely to that, but him also being a fan of film uh
Mhm.
contributes to that. There is an element watching this film where I'm like, he he's heard the criticisms of glorification of violence his whole career. He's had moments where I think he himself has struggled with it. I've always wanted to kind of hear Scorsese's direct account of what that news was like to find out that John Hinckley Jr. shot the president and
Mhm.
how tied in Taxi Driver was to that. How King of Comedy is a response to that act essentially. Like, there's this element where he's directly discussed it in movies like The King of Comedy. He's also, you know, he's also received criticism for that depiction. And I think he's aware of that. Like, this isn't a director who's not aware of that and even like hypersensitive of it. And Irishman is him to a degree, maybe not necessarily addressing the critics, but him acknowledging some of the, as he may or may not see it, some of the struggles that maybe some of his other films lack, some of the youngness of a director like him at that point in 1990 versus 2019.
It's definitely coming at it from a different angle. I think where Goodfellas and Casino are very much made in the same style. This could have been made similarly, and it's not. And of course, when I say this could have been made, I don't mean the final act, which is its own kind of separate tone in some ways. But I'm sure we'll get to that eventually.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. The element of this movie, like I said, going into this, the thing that excited me the most of this watching it was Joe Pesci again in this movie. Just they start the movie with him in it early on, and it's just this relationship that we get of Frank and Jimmy Hoffa. Sorry, not Jimmy Hoffa. Sorry, that's Al Pacino. Russell,
Hmm.
Russell and Frank. And there's this scene at the very beginning where they're driving through uh, Philadelphia. They're having, this car ride together. And then you start getting the flashbacks and all of that. And Pesci in this movie is incredible. And I mean, I say that as someone who is this whole series has been just so complimentary of Pesci's work. And this work, it's so different than everything Pesci has ever done for Scorsese, where we all know what Pesci has been really good at in Scorsese movies. He's the loud, crazy guy that's impossible to control, and he's a
Hmm.
maniac, and he's really frightening. In this movie, he's so subdued. He's so just he doesn't feel anywhere near as intimidating as he once did in Casino and Goodfellas, and yet he holds all the power. It's just this magnetic performance that he gives that is just so complimentary to the movie that he's in.
Yeah, in 2019, it was just a thrill just to see Joe Pesci
Yeah.
at first because it's been so long. I mean, he did one film, I think in the last 10 years, and then that was it. Of course, now you can see him on a Pete Davidson sitcom, so it's not quite
He's
as
so
rare anymore. But he is so good in this for all the reasons you say. It's very subdued. It's very, he's a shrewd, calculating character, in some ways a mirror image of the characters he's most famous for playing.
yeah, there's just an exciting thing about Pesci acting. And it's very hard to describe it. Uh he's always just been able to be the guy in a movie. He compliments everyone. Everyone in a scene with him is better off because they're in a scene with Pesci. He's such a generous actor in the sense that he can play it really subtle, he can play it really loud. He'll do whatever you need to do to complement the performance. And I think that comes off from who Joe Pesci is as an actor and as a person. We see him very rarely in our interviews. We don't know a lot about Joe Pesci. He's not a very public guy. He's very much of his craft, and that's where he stays. And that's, I think, what's so good about him as an actor is just like we don't know a lot about it. And I think
Hmm.
that mystery of who he is just adds so much to it. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but it, it I just love Joe Pesci. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get.
That's as simple as that. Yeah, no, he's fantastic in this.
Yeah, and then so I guess let's kind of just start breaking down this movie chronologically. It takes place in Philadelphia. It's the 1950s, right after World War II. This guy named Frank, played by Robert De Niro, he comes in contact. He's a delivery driver. He's a union delivery truck driver, I should say. And then he starts meeting, and he gets brought into this Philadelphia crime family headed by Angelo Bruno in this movie. And this is where he meets such characters as Bill, played brilliantly, in my opinion, by Ray Romano. I think Ray
Yeah, he's
Romano is
great.
so good in this movie.
Yeah,
He has
more
this.
more more dramatic roles for Ray Romano. He's
He,
fantastic in this.
he has this. I think the two movies he has back to back are The Big Sick in 2017
Hmm.
and The Irishman in 2019. I mean, just ultimate two of my favorite Ray Romano performances ever. He is so perfectly served as a Scorsese character actor that I hope we get more of that, and I hope we see Romano doing more of that. But anyway, so we're in this scene. They're
And
all
for what it's
coming.
worth, you can currently see him in Bupkis, which is the same Pete Davidson sitcom that
Is
Joe
he in
Pesci
that
is
show?
in. He's a guest. He's a guest.
Oh, I didn't realize he was in there at all.
Yeah, I didn't either. I just looked it up, but yeah,
I just saw him
he's
in a
in there.
movie. Did you see Somewhere in Queens? It was his directorial. I think
No, I
it's
didn't see that one.
actually pretty good. He's good in the movie. It's a little bit more comedic. He's playing basically an older version of his character from Everybody Loves Raymond. But I like Ray Romano, so it's always fun to
Hmm.
see him in movies. I would definitely check it out. It's worth your time. Not a great movie, but definitely worth your time. But so anyway, we're in this movie. They're going through meets the crime families, and that's kind of where it all uh kickstarts, and we start seeing him as his early life in a hitman. And Keith, I kind of mentioned this earlier on in the movie, or in our discussion of the movie, I should say. Watching this movie, like there is a section of the movie that I'm trying to. There's a lot going on. This first act really does cover a lot of years really quickly, and it's not as engaging as like it doesn't just bring you in the same way Goodfellas or a lot of these other movies do. It's very subtle for Scorsese. It takes its time, and I find myself when watching this movie, it took me kind of a second to get back into this world.
It's different the way it approaches its big turning points too, where some of the other ones, their characters cross these Rubicons that they can't come back from, right?
Mm.
And that happens to Frank too, but it's happens almost so quietly and so casually. He just kind of segues into contract killing from his previous life. I mean, from truck driver to crooked truck driver to hitman and three easy steps. But there's nothing. He doesn't seem tortured about it. It just seems it's something he just kind of slides into. It's very strange in some ways. It's very undramatic in its most dramatic moments, and
Mm.
it's not an approach I've seen before from Scorsese or anyone else, really.
And I think it's actually largely due to Robert De Niro's performance in this movie. Robert De
Hmm.
Niro is extremely subtle in this movie. Everything is so it almost brushes off of him, and it's kind of the devastating aspect of this movie. But even there's just a line really early on where they're talking about like killing someone, and I think they have to burn the body or whatever happens, and he's like, "It is as it is,"
Hmm.
something along those lines. And it's just like there's this kind of throwaway nature to how Frank sees everything of his past. Like it was just like I'm doing a job, and like this is my job, and it makes that such a De Niro in this movie is so just toned down in a way that one we haven't always seen De Niro in Scorsese movies, but two in in The Irishman, I just find it so captivating. I think he in this movie is I'm so lost for words with this performance, and I'm having even trouble describing it for him. But he's so almost disattached from reality when I watch this movie, where it's just like he's living in this world, he's doing his job. It's so blue collar, I guess. Like it is just like a guy doing his job, and there's not
Hmm.
a lot of glamour for doing your day job.
No, for sure, and I think that matter of factness it is disarming in many ways because you're not, as kind of touching on before, you're expecting things to be depicted more dramatically as well. It is just his life, as you say.
Yeah, there's the day-to-day quality of it. I mean, like one of my favorite like just scenes, and it's almost played as a joke, but it's also a very serious scene, is where he just drives to the bridge and he keeps throwing the gun,
Hmm.
and you just see him doing there's a montage of him just doing it over and over again, and it's this the body count. So much of the death in this movie is off screen, and yet every time you do it, it's a that point of no return, the Rubicon that you talked about earlier. Every time he does it, it feels like he's losing a part of his soul. It's a further descent into something that he will never be able to pull out of.
And it may be something he doesn't even seem to notice or care about in many
Mhm.
ways. He does kind of just slough it off. I mean, I think that's part of the way that third act reckoning is so powerful, is like someone who's finally forced to confront what he's done and what he's become.
Yeah, no, there is this quality of him being this guy who's lived his whole life where it's just like that thing he says, it is as it is. Like, that's what I'm here to do. That's what I do. I don't have to think about the repercussions. And then finally, he's facing the part where that's the only thing he can think of. That's the only thing. And I love that Frank is never given the easy way out in this movie. There is never a moment where by the end of this film where Frank is ever even necessarily you sympathize with him, but you never feel for him necessarily. I think there is a level of sadness to just the life he lived, but it's almost that of pity rather than like I ever feel like this guy repents for anything he did. Catholic guilt being such a strong theme of Scorsese's work. This is a guy who I don't ever know if he feels fully guilty, even by the end of his life. He just he feels empty, and it's a shell performance from De Niro, where just he's living life until he dies now, and that's all it is. He's living, he's breathing, he's drinking, he's eating.
And maybe it was always so in some ways. Like,
Maybe.
what animates this guy? What makes him, what makes him happy? You never really see him experience a true moment of joy in this film either. And his friendships, I mean, I really feel like he does have a true friendship with Hoffa, but it's something that when he has to, he will discard it. And again, touching on the third act, and for what? I mean, what's he gained in the end?
Yeah, and it's this element, we see the daughters predominantly through the first and second act of the movie, and then obviously they come back older in the third act. But I think we spend the most time with the daughters in the first act as he's kind of establishing his life as a hitman. And there's this moment, and it's a moment that you brought up earlier, is the scene where, the daughter comes home. She's been a little roughed up by the local grocer. And he comes in, he goes into the grocer, beats him up. And it's this approach, and it's so violent and yet so needless. And the daughter's watching in horror, but also just knows that's her dad. Like, there's the reason she's silent in that moment of before telling her, because she knows that's what her dad's going to do. It's not even a response that comes out of anger. That's just how he communicates with the world.
I love how Peggy always has Russell Buffalino's Joe Pesci's character always has his number. Like from the start, she knows she's judged his character and found it wanting. And that's such a it keeps the film has it comes back to that several times, and each time it kind of reinforces just how this person may be charming on the outside, but completely repugnant if once you look even a little bit beneath the surface.
Yeah, no, there's this the element that you talk about, and it's also one of my favorite scenes in the movie is the Christmas scene where they're all around the Christmas tree. The character played by Joe Pesci, Russell, he gives her skates. He gives her skates for Christmas, and like she barely says thank you. Like she's kind of forced by Frank to say thank you, and then I think he gives her $100 bill, which obviously at the time that's a huge amount of money to
Hmm.
be giving like a child, and she's just so like she sees that it's him trying to bribe her, and she sees that whole relationship she has with Russell as just that. Like she knows it is beneficial for her to get that money, but she doesn't care for them. She's never going to give him that love. And to some degree, Russell also understands that. And it's just like, well, I want to say that I have a good relationship with Frank's kids because I'm friends with Frank, or as friendly as with Frank as I can.
Yeah, absolutely, and yeah, I think she does complete, as you say, complete silence, complete walking away from it. She knows, the contrast between that relationship with the one she has with Jimmy Hoffa, I think we're kind of getting a little. Perhaps I'm jumping ahead too far, but it is, it's remarkable. Not, it's certainly you know, Hoffa, as depicted in this film, and no doubt in real life, was far from a perfect character, but he does genuinely have a connection with her and with humanity and other people in general in a way that the people deeper into organized crime, or organized crime is their main profession, do not. They've lost it.
Yeah, and we are about to jump into Jimmy Hoffa. There's 2 points that I want to talk about. We have the Harvey Keitel scene very early on in this movie as he
Hmm.
plays Angelo Bruno, the mob boss of Philadelphia at the time. That is,
Boss of bosses.
yeah, the boss of bosses. He has like a one-on-one sit down for real quickly. Keitel's incredible in
Hmm.
this one scene where it summarizes the stakes of this movie, where it's just like you feel his power. Like it is, if you agree to be here, you're here for life. There's no if or that. And I think it's absolutely incredible what he does with just such a little screen time. And then the other element that just tying back to that grocery store scene, this is the one scene where I think the CGI doesn't work. Of the whole movie, I didn't notice it really throughout. This is the one scene where, and it's the same issue. I don't know if you saw this movie this year. Did you see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
I did.
it has the same issue that has with that first act sequence on the train, where it's Harrison Ford moving like an 80-year-old man.
Hmm.
Robert De Niro does have that issue in this scene where he is moving very, you said the word janky. It's very weird how he moves. Like it felt like Polar Express, Robert Zemeckis' Polar Express, where the characters just don't fully move human
Yeah.
like. And I think it's the one instance of this movie where it doesn't work. There are instances like in the war de-aging scene where I notice it, and I don't think it's particularly great, but it never really distracts me. This scene, it is distracting, and it is an issue with the film solely because that scene's so important. And you are, at least for me, I was pulled out of the movie. This is probably the one scene of the de-aging where it did just pull me out of the movie fully.
Yeah, you can de-age the face, but you can't make an how was he 80 when he made this? No, I
I
don't
think
think
he's 78.
yeah, you can't make a 78-year-old man move like a 35-year-old or however he's supposed to be in that scene. Same with Sam Jackson in Captain Marvel. It's like the de-aging on his face looked great, but like he kind of walks like an older man.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's the one unfortunate decision. I besides that, I you know what, I've accepted the de-aging thing. I voiced this on this channel. I'm not a fan of the de-aging technology at all. I just generally am like, Godfather 2, they got De Niro to play a younger version of it. Like, if it was good enough for Godfather Part 2 and Francis Ford Coppola, I think everyone should follow that league. But like I said, in this movie, it's actually like the sin is not that heavy compared to other movies, and especially other movies and Star Wars TV shows that I've seen recently. But it is the one glaring moment in this film where it's just like, I wish this wasn't here.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see it. It didn't. It's kind of like for the reasons I mentioned before. It didn't really take me out of the film, but it's definitely the one where you're most paying attention to
Yeah.
the effects that don't quite work.
Yeah, and let's just get to if that's the one thing in this movie that I have a criticism of, and that is going to be the biggest criticism you hear from me in this discussion. Let's talk about the guy who I think is just incredible, flat out incredible. Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa
Hmm.
is like the movie is so centered around the second act and how you believe he interacts with Frank. This is so much of a Pacino coming in here, stealing the scene, doing what Pacino has been doing for the past 30 years. He's loud, he's energetic, he's so charismatic, and yet you see why Pacino is Pacino. He's one of the best actors. And in this movie, he's so good in these moments. Like, you believe the friendship he has with Frank. You believe all these interactions. It's just these small little character beats throughout. Like the scene in the diner that he has where he post finding out Kennedy's been shot and he does the press interview real quickly. Like all those scenes, it's Pacino being Pacino at its most. This is when the film is at its most kind of maximalist filmmaking, and I think it's so exciting to see him in this film.
It is, I think, with both De Niro and Pacino, I think Scorsese understands the actors they've become versus the actors they were, and
Mm.
brings out but De Niro with his like sort of kind of reliance on very very distinct facial expressions. My friend Scott Tobias calls it the face, the face. That he make, yeah, exactly, the face. And Pacino with the kind of the manic energy he brings to things, and I think that he allows them to give the best possible versions of those type of performances after a string of like hit or miss. I mean, I think the last stretch of both those actors' careers has been a lot sketchier. Let's say the first stretch.
Yeah, and specifically Pacino, 21st century. His If you look at his filmography, it's a lot of nothing for me. I mean, he has Insomnia with Nolan, which is probably like the big highlight. But post that, it's like it is a lot of movies that I really don't care about. Where De Niro,
Yeah,
he'll still do a Silver Linings Playbook, but even if I don't love that movie, I think De Niro's quite good in that movie. Like he'll still do it. Pacino was just like he got so lost in the image to some degree. Like he did, like every director post Heat just love the idea of having him be a screaming maniac. and that's to
Hmm.
a degree how a lot of directors end up using him in the 21st century. And not to say Scorsese doesn't have Pacino be loud in this movie, but it's loud with reason.
Well, I'm going to do a quick scan here. What's defensible? Insomnia is he's good in that.
He's good.
I
He's
mean,
great. And
he should be an all-time Merchant of Venice, all-time Shylock for Merchant of Venice, but I don't remember really liking that film. You get a lot of things like, 88 Minutes and Righteous Kill. They're just bad. Um, Manglehorn should have been a nice comeback movie. The David one he did with David Gordon Green, but it doesn't really quite work. I mean, yeah, there's not a lot here. I mean, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I like him in
that
that.
was the one I was about to point out where I'm like, he's good
And
in it, but it's a very small world.
and House of Gucci, but I like that movie.
He's
Even if I
he's
can't necessarily defend it, I like that movie.
he's so good in House of Gucci. Like
Yeah.
unquestionably, Ridley Scott's another of those directors who just sometimes knows how to use an actor,
Mm.
like Pacino. And it's the only Jared Leto performance that I'll defend. I think the rest are not my bag, I'll say. Yeah, no, it's a weird 21st century for him. I mean, like Jack and Jill is probably one of the more famous roles he's had in the 21st century, which
I
kind of
will say I have not watched Jack and Jill in its entirety, but that Dunkin' Donuts commercial I have watched so many times.
that is the only scene you need to see from the movie. Duncan
Yeah.
is like, that is the movie. That's it. But 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 yeah, I just think he works so well in The Irishman. There's just these moments that he has where one of my favorite moments, and I think this is probably the most like I had a friend who like watched this movie when it came out too. And he really only knows Scorsese through the the big ones. Goodfellas,
Mhm.
Casino, Wolf of Wall Street, Departed, Taxi Driver. Like he knows the hits. And so when he watched The Irishman, he was like, movie took a little while, but once Pacino gets in the movie, I'm fully in. And that's because it is the closest to conversation, I guess, that you'll have with Goodfellas, where there's so many scenes. Like the one of my favorite scenes in this movie, and it's Pacino just kind of getting to own the screen with his charisma. It's the scene where he has the freak out in his office and he's like talking about firing everyone, blah, blah, blah. And then like De Niro storms out of there. And then like they have this argument in the hallway where he's just like, no, I wasn't talking to you. Like I didn't even realize you were here. How could I be yelling at you if I didn't know you were here? Like that is Pacino's charisma, just at an overload.
It's terrific. I mean, it is like it was surprising. I was a little wary going into it that we get that Pacino was in this film. It's his first time working for Scorsese, and like you said, it hasn't been the best century for him. And as great as Heat is, his subsequent teaming with was it just one or two more movies he did with De Niro? I know Righteous Kill and was he
Three, he,
no Heat and then Righteous Kill and then there was another one in
oh,
there. No, but
um, no, he's not in stand up, guys. De Niro is
no,
not.
well, Righteous Kill is terrible. So it's like,
Righteous
it
Kill is
was,
so bad.
yeah. So, having those two together isn't necessarily a guarantee of greatness. And
They're not
right
on
now,
screen together. Godfather Part Two.
that's
That
true.
might be. Yeah. So, but yes, like the limited stuff is, yeah. I just like I said, De Niro's incredible in this movie, as is Al Pacino, and the Jimmy Hoffa stuff. I mean, I think every great director at some point should tackle Kennedy. It just seems to be a staple of our great directors where they're just like, for one movie, like even Nolan was just like, I gotta throw in Kennedy just at the end of Oppenheimer. Just to whet the appetite. I think all of our directors should have just a little bit of Kennedy in all their movies, or at least one of their movies. Let's
Or
talk.
two Kennedys, as the case may be here.
Yeah, fair point. He is that we do have both of them in this movie. This movie, like I said, I think the Hoffa stuff is where this is where the movie really starts coming together for me. Where again, first act, it's coming along, and then second act, I'm like, it's one of those things where from the moment Pacino gets in the film to the end, I don't feel the length of the 3.5 hours. It's that first like act that it takes me a little bit of time where I'm like, I am feeling this runtime a little bit. Uh, but yeah, there's so much in these moments, and there's so much I'm already skipping over that I feel bad about. Uh, I guess we should just start what are some of your scenes in this movie? Like what are the moments of this, maybe the Hoffa performance that stand out to you?
I mean, it's kind of all one big thing in a way, but I do like the moments of tenderness behind closed doors between he and Frank, where you get the sense that this obviously this is a relationship that was formed for out of expediency, but they like each other, and like
Mm.
they start hanging out together. They're his, Frank's kids, Peggy especially loves him, and there's a even though going into this, this does not end well for Hoffa. There's sort of this sense that even maybe in the midst of all this wreckage, that there's some sort of human connection that can be formed. That, and of course, the watermelon scene, which is
So that was gonna be the one.
what's
The,
that?
that was gonna be the one for me too, the
Yeah,
watermelon scene, because
yeah,
it's
exactly.
actually a perfect summation of who Hoffa is, in the fact of like, they talk about it like, oh, he's a guy who doesn't drink, so you can't like drink around him, but you can eat a lot of watermelon, and you see the scene of them putting in the watermelon. And Hoffa knows. Hoffa very much knows that there's alcohol in that watermelon,
Hmm.
but just the kind of the way he lets it pass, and it's just like that's because that's kind of a perfect summation of his career as well, where it's just like he knows there's some shady stuff being done that he's kind of complacent to, but it's okay for him. He can't be directly involved in it, and
Yeah,
that's
semi
who his
plausible
character is.
deniability.
Exactly. It's just like I'm not going to drink, but and you guys aren't going to drink around me, but you guys are eating watermelon. What else can I say? I didn't know. But he
Hmm.
knows, and that's who he is this whole movie. And he's a very classic politician in this. Like I said, even the scene where he's whenever he's talking to the press in this movie, he's always got the lines. He has those like kind of he has the quick, short lips. And I like I said, it's such an incredible performance. I love him in this movie. The scene for me that stands out the most for me, and again, I talked about earlier, it's the scene where he finds out Kennedy's dead, and just the freak out that he has, and just like where everyone else is kind of paying respect, he's just kind of getting angry, and because he has this rivalry with Kennedy.
And his refusal to have the flag flown at half mast. This is the extremes to which he'll go to nurse this grudge, to the point of defying the mood of the entire country, which is
Mm.
mourning this loss. Even those who don't love Kennedy, even his opponents, were still it's still a devastating blow to the country when that happened, except apparently for one person, Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I it all just really works together for me. And then there's the scene where he finally goes to jail, and you're in that you're seeing him being defended, everything, and he's like living this life in jail, which and maybe it's just because I had just seen the movies back to back. It's impossible to not compare that scene to the Goodfellas jail scene.
Hmm.
I just like there's so much in it where it's just like again, it's this idea that he has of the Scorsese has with this movie is what Goodfellas made it look like, where they're cutting the really skinny onions, like the glamour of like the meat sauce for the spaghetti and all that, versus what Irishman has it, where it's a very depressing. It's this jail just doesn't look like a fun setting to be with, and Hoffa's done with it. He doesn't want to be there anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though he has it comparatively easy compared to other, others around him, but yeah, it is the idea that everything that's made his life meaningful or enjoyable has been taken away from him.
Yeah, and I guess we can kind of start jumping into the next scenes of these movies, which is I'll call it Hoffa's paranoia. It is
Hmm.
the element where he comes out of jail and everyone's conspiring against him, and he's taking no prisoners at this point. He doesn't want to be back in jail. He also doesn't want to lose his power, and it's a man holding on uh, to any form of power that he has. It leads up to probably the one of the quintessential scenes in this movie, and we were all so excited to see De Niro and Pacino share the screen again that I don't think we realized how incredible it was going to be when Pacino and Pesci shared the screen together.
Mm.
And it's just kind of this, these true alpha male characters feeling each other up to a degree. Like they're biting at each other, they're kind of growling, but neither of them is going to strike. And Pacino's like, Pacino's done with it. Like he's so at this point done. Uh, or not Pacino specifically. I mean, obviously, Jimmy Hoffa. He's so done with Russell, the life, the lies that are being told, and Russell's doing the tough guy act. He's like, "You keep talking like this, and this isn't going to end well for you." And Hoffa's, bring it on. I don't care. Like that
And
is the tone.
I mean, he's a classic Scorsese obsessive too. At that point, he just can't stop. He can't help himself. He has to push on. And I think in some there's is kind of maybe a death wish involved because at a certain point he has to realize that he's not untouchable, but he just keeps pushing on anyway. And it's it's sad to watch in a way
Yeah,
as flawed a character as Hoffa is. You still want someone to realize they can get away from this awful life and get off this merry-go-round of carnage and corruption, but he just doesn't.
yeah. He has that moment where it's just like when he's finally confronted by Frank. He has a moment where Frank's essentially like, "You got to be careful," and he's like, "What are they going to do to me? I have all the information on them. Like they can't touch me." And that's always the point of a movie where you're like, "Well, that means they have to kill you then, so you
Hmm.
don't speak." And it is all coming to this blow. And the devastating part of this movie is you realize at a point Frank knows that. Like Frank is trying to stop the inevitable, but he also is so aware of who Hoffa is that he knows he won't be able to stop it. It's almost to a degree, it's him delaying it. Like, I got to keep you alive as long as I can.
And the long drawn out hit sequence, if we want to get there already, I think it's just such an amazing piece of filmmaking because I think it's the part where you see Frank really realize he's crossing a line he can't come by. It's the one Rubicon he crosses that he recognizes as such at the time. And the way it's just drawn out so torturously long, you see every detail, you go
Mhm.
through the planning, you see every detail of it. Um, the remarkable, but yet we get the remarkable comedy of Jesse Plemons, Chucky O'Brien, talking about the fish and
Oh yeah.
hauling a fish around. I mean, it's hilarious. And then the actual um killing itself is so it echoes the earlier killing of Whispers. I believe it's Whispers, where it's just headshot and you're done. And it's brutal, but also kind of feels anticlimactic because it's like, is it really that easy to end a life? And is it really easy to end that life? That sort of like huge American character, just kind of wipe him off with a couple of shots. And then after that, the return to Pesci from the airplane. I mean, it is an incredible stretch of filmmaking.
Oh yeah. It is this moment in this film where I've always adored, specifically in my second rewatch of this movie. I was just watching Pacino act in this scene that you just described there, and I'm like, does Hoffa know in this whole day, like when he gets to the house, does he know he's gonna die? And
Hmm.
I've never been able to fully get that answer, but there is this element of I I do get the sense that Hoffa is realizing this is only going to end in death. And maybe you're right. Maybe it is the death wish element. Maybe it's just the brazen, I'm going to push this until I can't push it no further. And
Hmm.
they're never going to be able to touch me. Maybe it is him believing in his own hubris. Like it could be elements of both of those. But it certainly does seem that by the time he is in the car, there's this element where he's just like, it's going to happen. And it also makes the scene all the more shocking when they get into the house and he's walking around. And the one thing that Pacino as Hoffa does not seem to recognize is that will be Frank who will pull the trigger.
Hmm.
He might be suspecting that he's going to die. He has no belief that Frank will be the one who does it. And that makes that scene so heartbreaking because the last little gasp that Pacino like utters when Hoffa is shot, just kind of the surprise, like that he knows who it is, and like that's how he dies. Like his friend is the one who's willing to kill him. It's so unsettling. It's so just sad. pathetic. I think you're right. It is just so empty. And it's just like the things that Hoffa valued, this friendship, this life, like the things that made Hoffa human, all of a sudden were just taken away from him, where it's just like that nothing mattered in that moment except that a job will take priority over a life. And I think Hoffa was surprised because I think at the moment he just thought Frank wasn't that, and Frank wouldn't be the one to be able to deliver that blow because of how much they meant to each other. And it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
I think in a career that has plenty of mob killings in it, it's the one moment in a Scorsese film where you're thinking about death as a larger subject.
Mm.
And I think it kind of in that way provides a fine segue into the final act of the film.
Yeah, no, because you hit it on the head on the nail, sort of the nail on the head right there of that moment, which it's the first time I watched it, I think everyone's kind of thinking at that moment there's going to be some form of a confrontation. And it's just not. It's just so empty. It is so quick and sudden, and it just ends. And you see them disposing of the body, and it could be Hoffa or it could be just some random guy Frank killed on the street. It doesn't matter. It's all the same, and it is as it is. Again, is the thing Frank says at the beginning of the movie, and that, and yet it's the one thing that seems to have lasted with him. I again, I don't know if this character of Frank ever fully makes amends with himself, or not even makes amends, but I'm not even sure if he ever feels sorry for what he did. The one element that seems to stick with him is that this moment, this day kind of destroyed whatever was left of a human in Frank.
And when he calls Hoffa's widow,
Mm,
Barbara, and just lies to her,
mm,
that's the moment he remembers later when he's, thinking, reflecting on his life. It's like, what kind of person can make that call?
mm.
And it is, an appalling act to be that dishonest with someone you're close to, and particularly when you're, you know the truth of this thing, and like, the one thing it might wreck your life, but the one thing that might give this woman peace is to know what happened to her husband, and she'll, famously, she'll never know that. The world will never know what happened to Hoffa.
Yeah, and it's this moment now that we're getting in, and it's kind of I believe it happens in this scene. Is the funeral is over Hoffa, correct? I want to make sure I'm remembering my details. The scene where Anna Paquin gives Robert De Niro kind of
Yes.
there, like
Yeah.
that is the
Yeah.
Hoffa funeral.
Mhm.
Like that is the movie. Like that is the part of this movie that he has driven away anything that is positive about his life. He has no family that cares about him. He has no friends. He is solely defined by what he does as a profession. And I think that element, obviously, like, I'm not a hitman. Like, I'll just admit that I feel fine admitting that on air.
Sure.
Not a hitman. There is an element, though, where I think the humanity of that scene is living a life where how much are you devoted to your professional life versus your personal life? Those sacrifices that you've made for your professional life at the sacrifice of your personal life. And so while I obviously can't relate to what Frank's character is going through that moment, there are certainly elements of when watching this movie where I do feel the feeling of knowing what it's like being solely defined by the career that you've chosen, not the life that you've lived. And I think that's a really powerful element of The Irishman is he is a hitman, and that's all he is defined by the end of his life.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what makes a, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. It's all that he's defined of, except by the end, no one even knows he's a hitman, so he has nothing.
Right. I think what makes the final stretch, what makes the final stretch universal rather than particular is that. I mean, it is a man, reflecting on his life, and wondering and realizing he's misplaced his priorities, and thinking about what really matters, and how it's too late to in any way redeem, himself in the eyes of his family. It is, we may not all or hopefully none of us listening are hitmen, but we all have the are fully capable of losing those who care about us by neglecting them and misplacing our priorities.
Yeah, it is the universal element of this movie and it's always the universal element of Scorsese. We can't imagine necessarily the lives that these characters have lived, but in Taxi Driver, we know the feeling of isolation. In Raging Bull,
Hmm.
we know the feeling of anger. In Wolf of Wall Street, we know the feeling of greed. It's these universal themes that make storytelling compelling, and that's what Scorsese just absolutely nails in The Irishman. And it leaves in this. I'm gonna have trouble talking about this final third act of the movie, but it is just a it's a life wasted by the end, and it's a life that he almost seemingly knows is wasted. Like, he's amounted nothing in his life. He has nothing to be proud looking back at. Even the one thing that he should take pride in the fact that his daughters seem to be well adjacent, like living, working members of society, and they're
Hmm.
not just broken down shells of the violence that he's caused. He can't take any like pride in that because by all accounts he should have destroyed them. By all accounts, like, they are miracles despite him. And so there's nothing that he can hang his hat on and be proud of. Like, there's a scene at the very end of the movie, and I think this performance is incredible. It doesn't get enough talk about. It's Dasha Polanco, I believe is how you pronounce her name. It's the nurse at the end of the
Oh,
movie.
sure. Yeah, she's great.
But it's just incredible because you almost feel it's probably the most life Frank has had in the whole movie, where he's getting to kind of share with her, like, basically it's someone who doesn't know who he is and doesn't know the ugliness of his life. So when she asks questions like, "Oh, do you have daughters?" and it's just like, "Oh yeah, I have 4 daughters," and then he gets to show her photos. It's the one joy that he gets to do because she doesn't know what it is. She doesn't know his relationship with Jimmy Hoffa. So, it's that moment that he just kind of gets to have with another person where it's just like, it's something that he can almost stand with, a beauty, and yet it's all lies. It's all built on a house of lies that he's kind of feeding her. And it's this character who can only lie. He knows nothing else but to lie and make up.
Yeah, that is a really good performance too, and not to get too personal, but I have a older mother who's now in an assisted living facility, and I've
Mm.
gotten to know a lot of people that work there, and it takes a really special kind of person to work there. You either are able to relate to people on their level of older people with special needs sometimes, or you're doing another job basically. They and like the kindness that she shows him, the way she listens even when she doesn't understand what he's talking about, it's something that's very true to that profession as well. But like the moment when he realizes that this person doesn't even know who Jimmy Hoffa is, one of the hugest figures in his life, one of the hugest figures in American history. And it's not a matter that she's, ignorant necessarily. She's not. She seems like a very with an intelligent woman, but the era in which he, was a giant of American history is in a past that she never experienced, and it's not meaningful to her in any way. The most meaningful things in his life are from an era in which she doesn't have any connection. It's all
Yeah,
going to fade away.
it's the fading quality of this final
Hmm.
act where it's just that you summed it up so perfectly, which is the moment that feels so important. Like, the thing that he has now defined his whole life on is this moment, obviously, where he kills Jimmy Hoffa. And like that seems to be like the final turning point, the final sin. And it's at what cost? Because now it doesn't matter. I mean, Hoffa's death is now meaningless essentially, because, and as they point out earlier, the people you killed would be dead now just due to age. So
Hmm.
nothing really has meaning anymore. Like, the final laugh is life. Like, life finally got, death comes for everybody. And that's such a disheartening statement for him to realize. Like I said, it's the scene that he has with the uh whoever the law enforcement is, where it's just like,
Hmm.
everyone's dead around you. Like, none of this matters anymore. All that matters is you could give some comfort to the Hoffa family, and you're refusing to do that. Like this whole sequence of it, just I think it's the best Scorsese has ever reached in his career. I think it's the most profound. I think it's all the themes that we've ever talked about with Scorsese, from Catholic guilt to violence to the destruction of violence to angry men. Everything that we've ever talked about is in here. And the element that I found so just watching this movie again after again, as I alluded to earlier, living in a post-COVID world, is just like all the negative experiences you will have lived will pass, except for you. And that's a really hard like idea to grapple with, where time will forgive everything else except you will never be able to forgive it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the one thing that should heal at time doesn't heal it in the case of Frank. And there will be regrets that he will live with till he dies. He will live with this for the rest of his life. And it's a haunting image. And it's just, yeah, it's absolutely just gut wrenchingly profound. And just I don't know. I don't have any more words to it. I just, every time I watch it, I'm just so amazed that someone could capture a feeling of emptiness like that. Because when he's in that room alone and you just see him sitting there for the final shot and it's just the door slightly cracked, it's a man who's built his kingdom in hell and now has nothing to show for it except destruction and pity.
And the build up to it is so well done too. The way they just kind of become old men in prison.
Mm.
It just kind of, it just kind of happens. And I think in a way, old age tends to creep up on people. I mean, I'd heard someone described, life is like you're young and then you kind of plateau and you're kind of the same for a long time, and then the decline sets in. And the way it happens that seems to arrive quickly, but then the final descent happens by degrees, like when Russell says, going to church, and you're going to church, like just wait. And then when Frank really finally does try to take comfort in religion and can't, it plays like a variation on the one truly great scene in The Godfather Part 3, which is Pacino's Michael Corleone, going to confession, and the priest just being unable to really fathom the crimes he's committed. In the Catholic Church you can be forgiven for everything, but boy, that's a lot. There's a lot to reckon with. And in this, it's like he can't even really fully engage with the priest in a way, because I think he realizes, he knows that he's gone too far, that perhaps even God will turn his back on him. It's the way also the music drops out. I mean, of course, Robbie Robertson just died, and I was thinking of him
Sure.
every time that remarkable score came in, but we don't even get that in the end. We just get silence and loneliness, and it is an incredible stretch of filmmaking, and it builds to a devastating ending that just kind of sneaks up. It is the final shot, the final lines. It's incredible stuff. It's a like, to circle back, it's an incredible final statement, even if it's not technically a final statement from Martin
Exactly.
Scorsese.
It's like there's so many moments in this final act that I just like. One of the hardest is just like even like the meta textual element of this movie of just seeing Joe Pesci old at the end and
Mhm.
shaking with Alzheimer's. Just the not being able to, just control the shaking, and just that element of old age is just so. I had a grandmother who, God, what year was it? So this movie comes out 2019. She died earlier that year. She was 94, 93 when she passed away. Like,
Mhm.
so she lived a long life, but like, like it's the subtlety of acting right there to the little shakes that he gives with his hand trembling. Like that's some of the moments I talked about that are just emotionally harrowing for me to watch. It's just like feeling that and seeing that again and kind of remembering like that's how my grandma looked, sounded, and moved in the final like few years. Like it's those moments where you just capture, and like it is time. It's time is of the essence, and it will eventually. That is, the final eliminator. It will take us all out. And the last kind of point I had on this is also just kind of the parallels to Scorsese's other works, how it's in conversation with each other. It's hard not to bring up Goodfellas because Goodfellas is probably the most famous movie of organized crime that he's made. But the scene at the beginning of Goodfellas where they're going through the hallway, uh, and they're in the kitchen and all that, and then in this scene, it's the kind of the exact same shot, except now you're going through a nursing home, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just sad. It's just really the life is sucked out of the screen, and it's the life that they've lived in. The one aspect that they should have joy in again is just like, you know family and loved ones, and he has nothing. He literally has nothing by the end of this movie, and it's just the one thing he has is the memory of Hoffa and what he did, and it's replicated at the very end of the door where the door is just slightly ajar, and it's almost to some degree you could call that him paying tribute to Hoffa, or you could call that Hoffa never being able to leave. You will
Yeah.
always remember Hoffa.
It is a case also where we kind of touched on this, where the relationship you have with these actors, seeing them for so long over the years, seeing them in Scorsese movies, seeing them in other movies too. But it's like, you know, to see De Niro playing a feeble character, like the moment when he falls, that kind of leads to his commitment to the nursing home. It's devastating just as the character, just because you naturally empathize with the character, even a detestable character like Frank. But also it's the reality is that De Niro is getting older. Scorsese is getting older. They're not going to be around forever. Pesci we've barely seen, and even I'm not really sure which scenes in here there's no aging technique involved, but but he's definitely an older looking, even in the scenes where there don't appear to be any sort of old age makeup or de-aging technology. It's a lot to see that, and Scorsese doesn't shy away from the implications of that. It's just, it's um kind of scary to realize the people that we love, not just in our lives, but people who we love as artists, aren't going to be with us forever. And it makes us think of our own mortality. At least, I'm seeing, I love Bob Dylan. I'm seeing Bob Dylan in a few weeks. It's like, will I ever see him again? I don't know. It's just, time, the numbers don't necessarily suggest that I will.
It's the same thing because I mean I saw Bob Dylan last year
Hmm.
in concert, and just I had the same feeling. I was just like, I've been kind of doing that with some of the greats where I was just like, I paid a lot of money to go see Paul McCartney just because I'm like, I'm never gonna. What are the chances that I get to see McCartney come touring in NorCal? Like, I
Hmm.
just have to take this opportunity because I can't take that for granted.
He's also
Uh,
so good in concert. He
so
still puts
good
on a
live.
great
Oh my
show.
god, he put on a 3 hour show standing the entire time, ends it with him waving the Ukrainian flag uh,
Yeah.
as he does the final three songs on Abbey Road. I mean, just an incredible concert.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, no, it's all this element of these movies, which is also just you then think about Scorsese, and it's just like it is kind of the final swan song for him to a degree, where it's just like you're right. It does feel like watching this movie and knowing I still get Killers of the Flower Moon is like exciting, and at the same time, I'm just like that. It almost doesn't feel connected. Like it almost feels like to a degree it's we're almost allowed to mourn the career and loss of that will one day come of Scorsese,
Hmm.
like which is a really tough thing to do. But it is like that is this element. I can't imagine watching this movie in like 20 years, whatever, like whatever this whole period of filmmaking is gone. Like from that, like it's a devastating thought, and it's a really emotional thought, and it's also just like you learn so much about film through him, and it's just like this is why he's one of our best because he can show us the moments of life and the hardships that we don't necessarily want to confront, but it's healthy to confront. And Scorsese's willing to put that on the screen, and I'm just so glad that we have an artist who's willing to do that because what Scorsese is able to demonstrate in The Irishman and his whole career as a whole is an ability to be vulnerable for audience and in the name of art. And that's an incredibly personal and tough thing to do. And I just champion any artist who is willing to do that for us.
I mean, is there anyone else in the conversation we talk about the best living American director? I don't think there is. I really don't.
Oh,
Just
no.
no one. There's no real competition there. As many great directors are that are still working. There's Scorsese's kind of in a different class.
I mean, it's him or Spielberg. It feels like
Yeah.
those are our true premier American directors. And it's just like, I mean, I had that experience. I was just at Universal Studios a few weeks ago, the amusement park, and I was kind of so blown away. I didn't realize when I was there younger, but I'm like, this is kind of the place that Spielberg built. Like, you're
Hmm.
just looking around and you're like, Amblin is just everywhere here. Uh, but yeah, like I said, it's just the talents of our greats, and it's just the fact that we have the Irishman is something to cherish.
Hmm.
And the fact that we get Killers of the Flower Moon is just another thing to cherish.
And
It's
I don't think that's the end either. I think he'll work until he can't work anymore.
Yeah, I know. It's just we're going to get movies. He is not someone retiring, and that's exciting. That's a very exciting, and I'm so looking forward to Killers of the Flower Moon, which at this point, I don't know when I'm seeing it. You have not seen it at this point,
I have
correct?
not seen it. No, it's not screened
Okay.
here. I know it's screened at Cannes, but I wasn't there.
Yeah, neither was I. In theory, I will be seeing it in exactly a month at my local IMAX, which is my final thing that I want to say on this podcast before we kind of jump on the thing. Support filmmakers making films like this.
Hmm.
Killers of the Flower Moon will be in IMAX. I hope it has kind of the same similar turnout that we saw Oppenheimer have. That'd be incredible if we get another Killers of the Flower Moon, or we get another Oppenheimer success with Killers of the Flower Moon.
And hey, while you're at it, IMAX, build a theater in Chicago. We don't have one anymore. We don't have a proper IMAX in this one of the largest cities in America, but that's a whole other topic.
You don't have an IMAX at all in
We
Chicago?
did, we did, and then it closed down and nothing's taken its place. We have like fake IMAXs, which I like the IMAX branded big screens that are in multiplexes. I like seeing movies there, but
Hmm.
calling it my IMAX it's a stretch.
Nothing beats seeing it on an actual IMAX screen. I saw Oppenheimer like 3 times. We had it. We got lucky enough that Nolan approved our theater to have his 16-mile film played there,
Oh,
70
nice.
millimeter, like moment I will always cherish.
I
But
did
with
get to
that
see
all
it in
said, like,
oh, I was
oh,
gonna say I
sorry.
did get to see it in 70 millimeter here at the Music Box, but not IMAX.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible experience to see at 70 millimeter IMAX. I'll never forget that watching experience. But with that all said, that's kind of my conversation, my elements that I want to bring up for The Irishman. Is there anything you wanted to say before we kind of wrap up this conversation?
I think we touched on it all, really. The Robertson score, I guess, maybe it's just kind of on my mind because he died so recently,
Yeah,
it's really kind of focused in on that. Is it's great work. I mean, it's great. It's top notch work all around from Rodrigo Prieto, who I don't think he'd worked with before, but just one of the best cinematographers around. And of course, you got it's peerlessly edited by Thelma Schoonmaker.
I don't
One of
bring
the
her
best to ever do
enough.
it.
Yeah, I don't bring her up enough on the show because it's almost like now a staple of the show where it's just like,
Hmm.
it's how else do you describe Thelma's work except that it's exceptional every time? Like, it's just every movie she ever edits for Scorsese. I'm like, that's perfect. That's it. That's all
Yeah,
we need.
she gets it.
She's so good. The one element that I will point out that I am very excited about with Killers of the Flower Moon, he's in this movie, but he doesn't have a huge role. I am very much looking forward to seeing Jesse Plemons get a
Oh,
bigger
right.
role in Killers of the Flower Moon.
Yeah, he's really great in this too.
He's so good. The scene where he just punches him out, and then like Pacino's just like cheering him on, like he's a boxer announcer, where he's just like, "That's my son. That's how Hoffa men do it." It's so good. Anyway,
Uh,
that's kind of our that I'll use that as our capstone for The Irishman, which kind of just brings us into our final segment of the show. Keith, there are 3 questions that I ask every guest. You're the
okay.
last one doing this because you are the last guest with The Irishman airing last. So we've had some great answers for these. I'll throw out some of them in a second, but for these 2 questions that are tied together, who is an actor who was past that you would have loved to see work with Scorsese at some point in their career when they were still alive, and who is an actor who is still alive that could work with Scorsese. He's never gotten the chance to work with Scorsese that you'd love to see in a Scorsese film. For actors who have passed, we've had everyone from Philip Seymour Hoffman, Judy Garland, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, just Heath Ledger, just some of our great actors. And then for actors still alive, Jake Gyllenhaal has been a name that's been very popular. Meryl Streep. I have a name that I can't believe I haven't thought of today, until today. So I'll save that unless you say it. But yeah, those are just some of the names that have been brought up. I'm sure there's more. There's been every guest has been great about that. But yeah, so my question for you, Keith, who is an actor who is no longer with us that you would have loved to see work with Martin Scorsese?
So I really struggle with this one because it's just so kind of hard to reconcile older styles of acting or with never know how it's going to fit into the Scorsese world. But I thought about his great Journey Through Italian film documentary, and how obviously this is someone he has a personal connection with as well. But the way he so admired Ingrid Bergman's performances in Rossellini's films. Obviously, he was with her daughter for quite a while. But I mean, I think I would love to have seen what she could do in a Scorsese film, especially in a filmography which has many great female performances. But the standouts, we obviously go to Ellen Burstyn and Alice doesn't live here anymore. But like an Ingrid Bergman leading performance in a Scorsese film, I would love to have seen that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good answer. I was trying to think of mine, and oh wait, he worked with him. I was about to say Gregory Peck, so I'm changing last second because
Yeah,
Gregory Peck
briefly in Cape Fear,
Cape
right?
Fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's very briefly in Cape Fear. I'll go Vincent Price.
Okay.
I will go Vincent Price. There is a style that Vincent Price is a hard one because he's a really talented actor, but he's used so specifically in the movies that he's in at that time. I just think he has a look. And there's sometimes where it's hard to like not looking at an actor and then just be like, look at them and just be like, you have what it looks like to be in a Scorsese movie. Like, I think that ultimately is the summation of Vincent Price, where I'm just like, he has that for me. He has that it factor.
He also has range that he didn't get to explore very often. Like if you've ever seen the film Witchfinder General, which was
Mm.
released in the US as Conqueror Worm, where he plays the Witchfinder General, and it's really actually genuinely scary, chilling performance. And it's not a good movie like at all. But it did as well. It's got some qualities, but the Dennis Hopper film Catchfire, he plays a mobster and he's really quite chilling, just like someone to see Vincent Price actually play actual evil versus horror movie evil is a little disconcerting in itself, but he does it very well.
Because I think is the last one of the last movies we get of him is Edward Scissorhands, right? He is
Yeah, that's a great final performance for a
yeah,
great
but it's
final
just
role
like
for him.
thinking of what he does in like even The Fly, the Ten Commandments, all those movies. I feel like he has it. The other name that I'll throw out because I've done this whole series and I can't believe I never thought of it. Burt Reynolds
Mm.
just seems like another guy where it's just like you know, Reynolds is obviously kind of famous for one of his last big roles as Paul Thomas Anderson in Boogie Nights. Like just like Scorsese always knows how to work with some of our most charismatic actors, and yeah, it always felt like there could have been a role for a guy like Reynolds. So I would have loved to see that. So those are my two names. So with that, actor who's living that has never worked with Scorsese that you'd love to see.
So I got to credit my wife for giving me this name because it's someone we always talk about as being a great actor who is underutilized, can continue underutilized apart from his one big role, which is a TV role, but he's never been able to find the film role that really suits him, and that's John Hamm. And I feel like he can kind of do anything. I mean,
Mm,
if you put him in like something like this where he can do the more lean to the comic side, like no one saw Confess Fletch except, but everyone who did see it loves it, and like he's so good.
so
I
good in
want,
that
I want
movie.
like a whole string of Fletch films starring him. But I mean, as Mad Men proved again and again, he's a great dramatic actor and like some sort of thing who can really he's never just on film, he just never found the project or rarely found the project that showcases what he could do. And I think maybe a Scorsese film could rectify that. I mean, look what he did for Ray Romano in this. I mean, he's just so Romano is not twisting his appearance or demeanor into new shapes from the Ray Romano we know, but it's clearly a different side of him.
Yeah, no, that's such a good pull. And Ham's such a weird guy because you're right. He's like one of our great TV actors. He's never really had the translation over to film. He's had roles where I think people use him correctly. I think he's great in Top Gun Maverick, but he's like the sixth lead in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's absolutely wonderful in Baby Driver, a movie which I like but don't love, but he is kind of the standout for me in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And like he's great in The Town, but like he's never really had it. I don't know if it's just kind of he has this pretty boy look to him, but he's like not like traditional pretty. I don't know. He just has a look to him that again I feel like would suit. And I like John Hamm a lot. My two picks, because I'm doing two for this one, because I can't believe I haven't said either of them. I almost feel like I've said them and I just don't remember saying them. I have Christian Bale because it's
Mm,
Christian Bale.
of
Like
course.
and Christian Bale just needs to stop working with David O. Russell. If him working with Scorsese means I never have to see Christian Bale in another Amsterdam movie, I live with that completely fine with my decisions. Christian Bale is one of my favorite actors working today. I think the commitment he could give to Scorsese, that sounds exciting to me. The other guy, I just couldn't believe I haven't said it. He's American sweetheart. He's worked with all the best directors. He actually just this year got to work with one of our best directors. It's Wes Anderson. He worked with us, Wes Anderson this year is what I mean. It's Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks should
Yeah.
be in a movie with
They were
Scorsese.
good. There was talk of doing an adaptation of Nick Tosh's Dino, the
Oh,
The
really?
Dean Martin biography, like for a long time, and I really wanted to see that movie. I mean, Tom Hanks doing the comedic take on Martin on Saturday Night Live was always great, but I think he could really. It is. Thinking about it, that book is kind of The Irishman, but with Dean Martin in a way, because it just ends with his life ends in on such a sad, empty note, where everything that he thought was worthwhile, he kind of realizes worthless. Obviously, it's Tasha's is a very, as a biographer, a very florid and writer who kind of inserted his own take on things into the piece. But it's a great book, and I would love to have seen Scorsese do that movie. But alas, I don't think we're going to get that one now.
I don't think we're getting it. I still hope we get his Jerry Garcia movie that he's teasing.
I don't think I
For
know too much about that.
I've just heard that he's had a Jerry Garcia movie in the works for the past 10 or so.
Okay, I'd
So
watch that for sure.
definitely want that. So I guess that brings us to the final segment of this episode, which is just simply your top five Scorsese, which is an impossible question. And I have my list down and I still don't know how I feel about it. So I guess the question is, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
I can go first. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's your series. You should get to bring it home. I was talking this over with somebody. It's like there are we were talking about the impossibility of doing a Martin Scorsese ranked list, although I'm sure I've done one at some point in my career. But like, there's, you can use that knocking at my door is still kind of finding his own voice. Boxcar Bertha is not great, but you can make a
I
case for
saw it
just
yesterday. Actually, I like that movie, but it's definitely not in the top five.
no, it's definitely got. You should see it. It's got a lot to recommend it, but it's not. Yeah, but you could honestly choose five films at random and make a case for them. This is five best films. I think mine's a little basic. I'm just going to go. I'll just go through it pretty quickly. I mean, Taxi Driver. Do I need to say anything more
Hmm.
beyond Taxi Driver has to be there? Goodfellas has to be there. So kind of what with more personal choices for the rest of the list, which is The Last Temptation of Christ. I mean, I just feel Scorsese's personal investment in that, and as a some of it's just the history of it. I'm old enough to remember all the controversy around it, all the protests.
Hmm.
I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and it seemed like an act of daring for a theater to show that movie in some ways. And when you see the film itself, it is such a reverent film. It is such a film made by a person wrestling with faith. And I don't think any faith that you don't wrestle with is not true faith at all. So I love that movie for that. I think it's all up there on the screen. Um
Yeah,
and
agreed.
that,
So.
And
It's so
for me,
deeply devote to by its ending, where you just
oh,
feel forever. It's like I think it's a beautiful movie of faith.
oh, absolutely. I mean, and just yeah, the history around it kind of informs maybe is what nudged it onto the list, but it definitely belongs there
Mm,
in the conversation. And I guess I got two more left, huh? So I put After Hours on there
mm,
with a like sort of asterisk. You kind of put Life Lessons on there too. It's kind of personally, these are movies that kind of informed what I thought of as New York when I was a kid growing
sure.
up in Ohio. These are my first visions of New York, and I don't live in New York. I've never lived in New York. I do love the city, but also kind of glimpses of a wider world than I was getting, with possibilities like with like performance artists and all kinds of strange people, and you could wander in the city at night and have an adventure, or even and it could become terrifying. Who knows? So that leaves one, and I vacillated here, but I'm just going to go with the Irishman. I think I talked myself into putting it on my top five over the course of this conversation, even though it was kind of hovering there already. So that's my five. How about you?
You have them ranked, or is it
No,
impossible for you?
no, I'm not gonna rank them. I'm not gonna
Okay,
rank them. You,
that's
you
fair.
can rank yours. That's fine.
So I'm actually glad you mentioned a few of those because After Hours is the case of I saw it this year when it released the Criterion. First time I'd ever seen the movie. This is a case of if I saw this movie 10 years ago, this would be unquestionably on my top five. I just haven't
Mhm.
gotten to live with this movie as long as I've gotten to live with some of these other movies. And I do actually think that does inform a personal top five list is your relationship with these movies and the staying power they've had. So that's simply the reason After Hours is not making this list, although it is probably in 10 years, I'd have to assume, because this is one of my favorite films that he's done.
I
I
kind of
have
wonder
some
that
other,
about Silence for me. I wonder if that's going to be just like creep up my rankings as
yeah.
time goes by and I revisit it.
So there's a few other honorable mentions that I wanted to throw out there. And it's kind of impossible because they're all honorable mentions to some degree. Goodfellas is not making my list. Again, it's kind of one of those ones that I discovered a little older, and I have relations with other of his movies more than I have Goodfellas, even though second time rewatching Goodfellas, movie's just incredible. Same with Taxi Driver. Uh, the other two that I was just so tempted on, I saw Hugo for the first time yesterday, and I was like, my God, I love this movie. Like, this
Hmm.
quickly was just like, I'm in love with Hugo. And then this isn't really a full movie, but the Werewolves of London scene in Color of Money, if that could just be, if I just get that as my movie, that's probably number five, but I don't get that.
Hmm.
And then the last honorable mention I have is Kundun. And this is probably just the fact that I spoke with Drew McWeeny for this movie for about like 2 hours. And he just really colored my perspective on this movie. And I really grew just an appreciation and love for this movie post talking with him. But my top five, I have them ranked. Coming in at number five, I'm gonna do a movie you actually just mentioned. I'm doing Silence here at number five. I of all the religious exercises that Scorsese has done in his career, I find Silence the most rewarding. I think all the performances are incredible. Cinematography, everything from this movie is wonderful for me. And it's the ending is again one of those really powerhouse ones for me. Coming at number four, this is the movie that I've lived the longest with Scorsese. This was probably really my first discovery of who Scorsese was. And it's Wolf of Wall Street. Saw this movie when I was 15. I've seen this movie countless times. I just love the energy of this movie. I think it's DiCaprio's best performance of his career. It's his best comedy. Yeah, I love Wolf of Wall Street. That's coming in at my number four. Coming in at my number three, again, one of these movies that I've now just lived with for 15 years. And every time I watch it, I'm just like, this movie moves, the energy, the excitement, the thrills of this movie, the performances, everything. I think The Departed is excellent. I love The Departed in every aspect of it. Uh, I know some people have degraded it over the years. I do think it's still just excellent filmmaking, and it is so Scorsese just allowed to have as much fun as he wants on screen, and he has it. Coming in at number two, this one actually climbed my rankings quite a bit. Uh, it's a hard movie to watch, but in speaking with Isaac Feldberg with this movie and already just kind of having a love for this movie and just hearing more about it and thinking about it. And it's the movie that's now stuck with me for weeks post watching it. I have Raging Bull in
Mm.
at my number two. It's Raging Bull. What else is there to say? And then coming in at my number one, anyone who's known me, especially if you knew me in college and knew how fascinated I was with this movie, knows this is the movie of his that I've seen the most. This is the movie that fascinates me from him. It's the movie that I find elements from every time I watch it. Something new, something exciting. I think it's the best performance De Niro has ever given in his career. I just find it the most personal film Scorsese has ever made. I just did a list where I was asked to talk about my top 10 favorite movies of all time. This movie made it. The King of Comedy. It's my number one. The King of Comedy to me is just the perfect. It's someone feeling something so strong in their life at that moment and just needing to get it out. It is exercising a demon in many ways. And I love what King of Comedy achieves, especially in its finale, finale that I think is bone chilling, as is Taxi Driver, as is Goodfellas, as is Raging Bull. I think it competes with any of those. So that is my number one, The King of Comedy.
It's a good one. They're all good. Like I said, you could do a five list of five, any five. You can make a case for it. I think you make a good case for yours.
Yeah, no. So I'm happy with mine. We'll see how much it changes as the weeks go out. Maybe I rewatch Taxi Driver again. I'm like, this should be in the number five. We'll always live with that. And that's the show. And that's the series. This isn't the end of the series. Isaac Feldberg will be joining me again for Killers of the Flower Moon, which I'm very excited about. But that is the series as of now. So you're going to be seeing this episode October 20th, guys. We're recording this September 11th. So I just wanted to just say, just enjoy Killers of the Flower Moon. I can't wait that everyone gets to watch this movie and we're going to have discussions on this. And let's just treasure the experience of seeing a Martin Scorsese movie in theaters. So with that said, Keith, thank you so much for joining me. I see we have a special guest joining us as well.
My cat making a one last minute cameo appearance here. Yeah, thanks for having me on. This is fantastic. I enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Yes, thank you so much, Keith. And Keith, right before we go, just let the people know where they can find you.
You can find me. I'm technically still on Twitter or X or whatever. Phipps 3000. I'm more often on Blue Sky, which has that weird username, but it's kphipps3000.bsky.social. More, it's easy to find me, several times a week at the Reveal, which is a newsletter I co-write with Scott Tobias, another long-term critic and a long-time critic and good friend of mine. It's thereveal.substack.com. We do reviews, we do interviews, we do essays. If you've liked what we've done in the past, you'll find it there. And I also co-host the Next Picture Show podcast, which I co-host that with Scott Tobias, Tasha Robinson, and Genevieve Koski, all longtime co-workers going back through the Dissolve and the AD Club. And we take a new movie, we take an old movie that kind of fits together, and we talk about them, and that's the show.
Yeah, and I wish I had it. My book's over there. I have Age of Cage on my bookcase.
Well, thank you.
Right now. Just one last promotion for that. If you love Nicolas Cage, this book is for you. If you're not even that big into Nicolas Cage and you just find movies fascinating, Age of Cage is for you. I think this book is so well written. It's so interesting. And it does do exactly as it promises. It gives you Hollywood summed up through one actor and kind of the trends, what we see in Hollywood during this time period. And it's all explained through probably our most bold actor living. And I recommend Age of Cage to everyone. Check it out. I know you can buy it on Amazon. Wherever you find books, you can find it. I've seen it at my local Barnes and Noble. It's a really exciting read. And Keith, I think it's a brilliant book.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, so definitely check that out. I'll have links to that in the description below. Anyway, guys, that's the series. That's it. I'm curious to hear from you guys. What's your favorite Martin Scorsese movie? What's your top five? Who's the actors? However you want to do it, let me know. I'm sure I'm still on X unless by October 20th it's gone, which it might be. But regardless, you can find me. You know where to find me. You're watching this show. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all for listening. Thank you to all of the guests that I've had on this series. I've had so many great guests that I've loved talking to. So thank you all for your time, your effort in making this series really special for me and for everyone listening. Appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all for watching. Take care and bye-bye.